let's talk about JSP elements now. We've learned that a JSP is nothing but HTML with some Java code in it, right? So we know how to build HTML pages. Now, how do we put the Java code in the HTML? We can do that using the JSP elements, right? So with the introduction of JSP elements, you can put Java code in your static HTML pages, which will make your static pages dynamic web pages, right? So you can build dynamic web pages using JSP elements in your HTML, static HTML files, which will make your static HTML file a JSP page, which is a dynamic page, right? So we have got 4 different types of JSP elements: JSP declarations, JSP scriptlets, JSP expressions, and JSP directives. Why do we have 4 different JSP elements here now? So we said that whenever you want to put Java in your HTML, you use JSP elements. So couldn't be nice to have only one JSP element, and whenever I need to use Java in my HTML page, I can simply put that JSP element in my HTML page and it should work fine, right? But why do we have 4? So basically each one of these JSP elements has got its own significance, and we will see why we have these different kinds of JSP elements and what are its uses. Okay. So let's just briefly discuss about all the 4 JSP elements here. JSP declarations. So whatever you put in JSP declarations, that code goes outside the service method, right? Now where did this service method come from? We know that service method is present in the servlets, right? So how did we get it? How did we get this service method in JSPs? So if you remember, we just discussed that a JSP is ultimately nothing but a servlet. So whatever code you put in a JSP, at the end it's going to be converted into a servlet, right? So whatever code you put in the JSP, in the end it is going to land into some or other method in a servlet, and whatever you put in JSP declaration, it goes outside the service method. So what does it mean? Let's say that you have some method you want to define which will be used by at many different places, right? So you don't want to put that same logic at multiple places in your code, right? So in turn you want to reuse your code, so you put that reusable chunk of code in a different method and you simply call that method from different places. So how can you achieve that? You can achieve that using JSP declarations. So you declare your method using JSP declarations, which will put that method outside the service method. So basically it's a class level method now, right? And alternatively, you can even have certain variables defined outside the service method, which will be used by all throughout the class, right? Next, scriptlets. So whatever code you put in a scriptlet, it goes into the service method, right? So most of the time you would be writing scriptlets in your JSP pages, right? Because we know that when you are coding servlets, most of the time what you would be doing is you would be overriding the doGet or doPost method, right? Which is similar to overriding the service method here. Okay. So in servlets, most of the time you would be overriding the doGet or doPost method. And what do you do in the doGet or doPost method? You basically add your business logic to achieve the functionality, right? To achieve the dynamic functionality. So similarly, even in JSPs, whenever you want to add some Java code, most of the times you will be adding some kind of business logic in your JSP page, right? And all your business logic would go in the service method, because every new request, the service method will be invoked, and you want this particular code to be executed whenever a new request comes to the JSP page, right? So that's JSP scriptlets. Next, JSP expressions. So basically whatever you put in the JSP expression, the code is evaluated and you get the value as an output. So let's say that I have a variable called int I, okay, and the value of I is 10. Okay, when I put I in the JSP expression tags, it's going to print 10 as the output, and not I, right? So basically, expression, it evaluates whatever expression you have put within the expression tags and displays the output back. It gives the output back. Okay. JSP directives. This is one of the very important JSP elements we have out there. So we'll be discussing in more detail about all these in the future slides, basically. But JSP directives are basically commands giving to the JSP engine. So we'll have a look at what it all means in the future slides. Alright. So now let's go into certain details of each of these JSP elements and have a more detailed look at how the syntax for all these JSP elements looks like, and where do you use it and why do you use these JSP elements. Okay. So starting off with JSP declarations, we just said what JSP declarations are, right? So the syntax for JSP declarations looks something like this. Okay, so whatever code goes within this syntax, right? So whatever code goes within this syntax is treated as a JSP declaration, right? And we know that everything you write in JSP declaration goes outside the service method. So if you declare any variables, it would be declared as a class level variable, and if you declare any methods, it will be treated as a class level method, instance method, right? So the advantages of using declarations, let's say for example, advantage of using a variable declaration is you can reuse the value across multiple requests, right? We'll just have a look in the next slide basically about that. Okay. So treat them as instance methods and instance variables, right? So what do you declare in the declarations? You can declare methods and variables, as we've already seen. Why do you need JSP declarations? If you have a variable that needs to be shared across different requests, so as I just told you, I have a variable that needs to be shared between different requests. So when I set a value of this variable to 10 for one request, the same value of 10 should be reflected when some other request comes in as well, right? And how is it possible? How does the value retain across multiple requests? We know that ultimately a JSP gets converted to a servlet, right? So whenever a new request to a servlet comes in, the service method is invoked. Only the service method is invoked, and the state of that particular class remains the same. That particular object remains the same. We know that servlets is a multi-threaded environment. So whenever you make a new request, a new thread is spawned, and the service method is invoked. So whatever is outside the service method, whatever instance variables you have in your class, will be shared across multiple requests, right? And when you have repeated common code in your JSP, declare it as a method, which we've already seen. So a simple example of having a JSP declaration is like this. So here we are declaring an instance variable called instance var, and we are assigning a value of 10 to that. Okay. So here we go. So let's see how it really works. I have 3 requests, okay, and let's assume that this big page is one JSP page, right? And ultimately it got converted into a servlet. So we know that since Java is since servlets are multi-threaded, for every new request a new thread is spawned, but we have the same servlet object, right? So when request 1 comes in, it spawns a new thread. So basically I have a new service method. When request 2 comes in, again I have a new service method, right? And ultimately when request 3 comes in, I'm going to have a new service method for request 3 as well. So for each request, I have got its own service method, right? So whatever is there within the service method is not being shared across these three requests. It's different for each of the requests, right? So each request is unique now in terms of the service method. But when you come to declarations, whatever you have in declarations is being shared by all these three requests, right? So request 1 is going to share the same value, request 2 is going to share the same value, and request 3 is also going to share the same value which you have in declarations. So let's say that I just declare and variable called I, and I set its value to 10 when in request 1. Okay, so now when request 3 comes in and it tries to get the value of I, it's going to see a value of 10 there because all declarations are shared across multiple requests. Similarly, if I would have put this value I10 as in the service method, if in the service method I would have declared an integer I and set the value 10 there, in service 2, when I make the request 3, in request 3 I will not see the value as 10 again. It will be the default value, which is probably 0, right? So here when you have variables declared in the service method, it's not shared across multiple requests, whereas when you have variables declared in declarations, it is shared across multiple requests. Okay. Right. The next JSP element is scriptlets. So whatever goes within these tags are treated as scriptlets. So you write pure Java code within scriptlets, and all the business logic which you want to put in your Java code in your JSP, you put them in the scriptlets. Okay. So we know that everything that you write in scriptlets goes in the service method. So treat variables in scriptlets as method or local variables. So when I say scriptlets, if I define any variable in scriptlets, it would have gone here in the service, right? So when I defined I is equal to 10 for request 2, its scope would only be for this particular thread only, and it will not be visible for this request, right? So treat them as method level local variables. Okay. What do you put in scriptlets? Basically you put business logic in JSPs. And why do you need scriptlets? To perform certain business logic. So the only reason we introduced Java in HTML was to produce dynamic content, right? And when we say we want to produce some dynamic content, we mean that we need to perform some kind of validation, some kind of business logic processing, so that we can generate an output based on the user input, right? So for that we need some kind of business logic. So that's the whole picture of scriptlets. That's where scriptlets comes into the picture. Okay. So need to perform some basic validations. So this is a basic example of a scriptlet where we've declared an local variable called local var and assigned a value of 10 to it. Okay. All right. Now JSP expressions. Whatever goes within these tags is treated as JSP expressions. Okay. So one thing to note in JSP expression is that whenever you put something in a JSP expression, you do not put a semicolon at the end of that, right? So that is not allowed. So let's say I want to print the value of I cannot say I semicolon. This is not allowed. So this semicolon is not really required here. I can simply say I and close that JSP expression tag. Okay, and it's going to work perfectly fine. So the code inside JSP expressions is evaluated and the output is displayed. Okay. Whatever is put inside the JSP expression should evaluate to a value, right? So basically sometimes you would need to print certain text onto the page, right, onto your web page. Let's say that the user logs in, and after successfully logging in on the login page, or say on the main page, you are going to display a message saying welcome username. So if the username was Tom, you say welcome Tom. If the username was Sharad, you say welcome Sharad. Right? How are you going to display this dynamic username? You can't do it with static HTML, right? Because whatever you put in the static HTML page will remain same for each and every user, and you can't really change that value there. So in order to do that, you need to insert dynamic name. So whatever the username the user enters with, you need to display that on the main page. So you can do that using scriptlets. So since we said that scriptlets, whatever code you put in scriptlets, the expression is evaluated and the output is displayed. So if I want to simply display the username on the screen on my web page, I simply give the scriptlets tag and I give name, whatever username variable I assign that value to, I put that variable there, and that will be displayed on my screen, right? And this is a basic example of declaring expressions, right? Okay. So even though we saw that how we can completely perform all the business logic processing and put all my Java code within JSPs, it is not really recommended to do bulk of business logic processing in your JSPs, because as we've talked many times, as we've said many times, JSP's main role of JSP should be for presentation logic, right, and not business logic. Okay. So the role of the business logic should be played by the servlets and its supporting classes, and not by JSPs. JSP should only be used for presentation logic. So in order to present the JSP a web page to the user, in order to present a dynamic web page to the user, whatever dynamic certain amount of logic or certain amount of business logic you need to write in your JSP, you can put that there. Otherwise, all the other hardcore business logic processing should be done in servlets and or the supporting Java classes, and you're going to simply call those methods from your JSPs. Okay, right. So these are about the first three JSP elements. Okay, so this is a very simple JSP example page where I have demonstrated the use of all the JSP elements we have used till now, or we have discussed till now. So that is JSP declarations, scriptlets, and expressions. Right. So what this basic page is going to do is it's going to display the message welcome username, and then it's going to display the user count, right? So let's say that I was the second person who accessed this web page. It's going to display welcome Sharad, and it's going to display you are user number 2, right? So let's say now that after me some other guy comes in and accesses this web page, it's going to display welcome whatever username, you are user number 3, right? So for each request that comes into this web page, for everyone who logs into this web page, and it's going to increase the user count by 1. So by this time you would have figured out at which place in this dynamic web page I need to use JSP elements, and what type of JSP elements I need to use where. So we know that the user count is shared across multiple requests, right? On the same web page, if somebody else logs in, it has to remember what the previous count was, and it has to increase that count, right? So we know that using declarations you can share the variable across multiple requests. So I'm going to declare the user count variable in the JSP declarations, right? So this is JSP declaration where I've declared the user count variable, and I initialized it to 0 in the beginning, right? So next I assigned a value of Sharad to the variable called name, and this goes into the service method, right? So for every new request, this will be a new name there. So I simply wrote Sharad here. I replaced the value Sharad, but in real time you would have fetched the value of the username whatever the user entered on the previous login screen, right? And after each request I'm increasing the user count by 1, right? And ultimately I'm going to display the user name and the user count. So we know that you how to display a value onto the screen, you'll have to use JSP expressions, right? So I use JSP expressions here to display the name and the user count, right? So with this example, probably you would have got a more clear picture of where these JSP elements come into the picture in your HTML pages and how you can use it.